Hey, it's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Geek-Stew, and today, guys, welcome back to another episode of Horror Stew. Today, guys, we're going to make a pretty quick video. I honestly didn't have a lot of time this week. I've been doing some different stuff. I know last weekend I pretty much played non-stop Resident Evil 8, so that was a lot of fun. Today, I'm going to give you a pretty brief, spoiler-free review of Resident Evil 8. Honestly, right now, Resident Evil 8 is still really new. It literally just came out last weekend, so I don't want to give too much information because I don't want to spoil it for anybody. And honestly, I would really recommend playing it yourself if you haven't already. But let's get into it. I do want to give a quick disclaimer that if I happen to accidentally spoil something from this, please forgive me. But I'm going to try and keep it as spoiler-free as possible because eventually I want to do a video about Resident Evil 8 that's a little more fleshed out and has a lot more information in it, but I do want to prepare for that a little bit more. So this video is more of just my first analysis, I guess you could say, of how I enjoyed it. Basically, did I like it, what I didn't like, you know, stuff like that. So let's get into it. Let's give a quick, hopefully spoiler-free review of Resident Evil 8. So I guess the first thing to say is, did I like it? Long story short, yes. I loved Resident Evil 8. I would say I like Resident Evil 8 even more than I did Resident Evil 7. If you don't follow me on TikTok, I actually put out a couple of predictions that I thought may have come true, but it ended up not happening. I had predicted that a character from another another entry in the Resident Evil franchise would be Mother Miranda. I theorized that it would be the little girl from Resident Evil Revelations 2, who I'm having a very hard time remembering her name all of a sudden. Of course, that didn't come to fruition, unfortunately, but that doesn't mean that she may not appear in another game. I hope they do, because I feel like that's a storyline that they could definitely tie into the series. But Resident Evil 8 is an incredibly good game. Such a good story. That's the first and foremost that I want to talk about, is the story itself. Now, we'll kind of get into some of the other mechanics here in just a second, but first I want to kind of give you a quick, I guess, review in my opinions regarding the story itself. The story was very well thought out, honestly. This game found a way to somehow tie into pretty much every other Resident Evil game, and it makes sense. That was what was really impressive to me, because I didn't understand how this was going to tie into any of the other games, obviously, other than Resident Evil 7, because of course this is Ethan Winters, and they do specifically talk about the events of Dulvey, Louisiana, and the events of Resident Evil 7, but more specifically, this game goes back and it ties into the very roots and origins of Resident Evil and the entity that sort of started it all, Umbrella. So Resident Evil 8, in my opinion, the story is top-notch. This story is god tier, because it has so much good, not only just fan service, but honestly a lot of history and a lot of backstory and exposition that legitimately makes sense. And not only that, this thing has the exact layout of any of the other great Resident Evil games that you've ever played. You move through very different areas and perspectives throughout the rest of the game. You don't just stay in one area. That was something that was kind of sucky about the Resident Evil 3 remake, was that it didn't have a whole lot of change in scenery. And this game also did something that Resident Evil 7 failed at, is that it gave us a variation in the enemies. Resident Evil 7 definitely was great. Obviously, Resident Evil 7 was a complete 180 from the other games that we'd had prior. I think really the other mainline titles prior to 7 being 4, 5, and 6. That trilogy really focused on action and really didn't do sort of did a disservice, in my opinion, to Resident Evil fans everywhere. They're fun games, of course, but Resident Evil 7 and 8 are very much the superior in regards to those. And of course, they're working on Resident Evil 9, so we'll have yet again another trilogy following the Winters clan. So that being said, I'm not going to give too much in regards to spoilers about the story, but what I will say is this: if you love the story of Resident Evil and you love being able to do more than just play a game, if you want to integrate yourself into a storyline and history and a timeline that just makes sense, you're going to love this game. Resident Evil 8 has it all. It has everything that you'd ever want in the story. But I'm not going to talk in too much depth about the story itself. What I want to do now is I want to move into some of the mechanics of the games. There are some very important mechanics of Resident Evil that we have to take into consideration when we talk about whether or not a Resident Evil game is successful. So, story aside, let's move into some of the other mechanics of Resident Evil 8. So the next important mechanic that I want to talk about is honestly the weapons. So something about Resident Evil 7 that I liked and disliked was the limits, I guess you could say, on what you had in regards to weapons. Obviously, you had your pistol, you had your shotgun. You at one point, you get a rifle. You have your various things that kind of go into that. But one of the things that I loved about other Resident Evil games is that you could purchase other guns to go into the game post-game. And this game is no exception. 7 had this to an extent, but I feel like Resident Evil 8 really did a huge service to fans by adding in so much extra content. And Resident Evil 7 had a lot. And honestly, Resident Evil 7 may have had extra modes like Not a Hero, and then the banned footage or the forgotten footage or whatever it was. Those were obviously incredible additions to Resident Evil 7 that really pushed the spookiness and the scare factor of Resident Evil 7. And then, of course, gave you the more humorous side of Jack's birthday. And then, of course, Ethan Must Die, which is challenging. But Resident Evil 7 does that too, or Resident Evil 8, I should say. Resident Evil 8 introduces the Village of Shadows, and of course the other Mercenaries mode. But before we get into the replayability, the weapons specifically are, and honestly, are a lot of fun. You could play the entire game by just upgrading the same weapons over and over, or you can venture out and you can find the other weapons, different shotguns and different pistols, as well as finding the revolver and the sniper rifle and the grenade launcher. And then post-game, you can then, of course, unlock automatic weapons such as short barrel rifles, the AK-47 or AK-47U or whatever the hell it is that Chris Redfield uses in his version of the game. And there are all kinds of other stuff that, you can unlock post-game that make the game entirely different. So you could play the game through 100 times, but then when you start unlocking the stuff, this makes the game different. And so, that being said, the weapons themselves are really great. There's a lot of variety, and in my opinion, you could play the same game over and over again, but with different weapons. And it's going to make the gameplay so much different. And then you also have the ability to unlock unlimited ammo. Of course, unlimited ammo is so much fun to play with. Start the game up, play with one weapon the entire time because it's unlimited ammo. And that's honestly, in my opinion, what makes the game even more fun, is that you can open it up to that opportunity of, I can just use this unlimited ammo handgun or unlimited ammo assault rifle and I can explore, right? One of the great things about playing the game through is that you really have to be conservative with your ammo because it is a survival horror game. So you have to think of the concept that you have to conserve your resources in order to succeed. So in this game, you have to do that. But on subsequent playthroughs, you don't have to do that. You can enjoy the story a little bit more. Maybe you can go back in and, go somewhere you hadn't been able to go in the original playthrough because you couldn't, right? You didn't have enough ammo. I ran into that a couple times. Obviously, I got really lucky because when I originally bought the game, it came with a survivor pack, and the survivor pack inside the game gave you a free ammunition, which I cashed in pretty early, and I obviously tried to conserve as much as possible. So as I was going back through and around the different areas, I was able to basically see and get all the different treasures and everything else. But going back through and playing it again, if I have the choice to, I would love to. I plan to, but I do want to do it with some extra ammo. So maybe I can maybe I can hang around a little bit longer in some of those areas that have a little more enemies that maybe I couldn't handle the first time. So that's definitely something to consider, as well as that this game does have a whole lot of replayability, which is what we're going to talk about next. That the replayability of this game is off the charts. Any Resident Evil game you play has to be replayable, all right? Plain and simple. Resident Evil 2 Remake, honestly, perfect example. Resident Evil 7 is a good example as well, but Resident Evil 2 Remake really struck home with it because not only did you have the different difficulties, but you also had 4 different scenarios. You had Leon A, Leon B, Claire A, Claire B. You had 4 different versions of the same game in some respect or another. Some were longer, some were shorter, but they were all different to some degree, right? Not only that, but you also had the other stuff You have the Fourth Survivor, the Hunk game, also the one with oh gosh, cannot remember his name. But there's different modes inside the game that basically give you more replayability, not only just through the main game, but also through side missions and everything else. That game also brought back the concept of having unlimited ammo weapons. Resident Evil 7, I believe, had something similar. But the point being is that you had all of this at your disposal to basically make the game more enjoyable. Resident Evil 8 is no different. Resident Evil 8, you can play the game through 100 times, and it's always going to be different because depending on how you operate and depending on how you do things, there are certain things that you can do at certain times, and if you don't do it the first time through, you're going to want to play it again so you do it the right way. There's also all kinds of treasure and everything else that you can collect, very similar to Resident Evil 4. One thing they brought back in this is that you can combine treasures. You can combine different types of treasures to make them more valuable to sell them to the merchant. The merchant, this of course is the Duke. If you've not watched any of the trailers, that's his name. Not gonna say too much, but a lot of these treasures are combinable. And something they did that they didn't do before is that they specifically and blatantly tell you this is a combinable item. So you don't accidentally sell a combinable item. I cannot tell you how many times I sold the beer stein on accident in Resident Evil 4 before putting the cat's eyes, I believe, in it. And when you put the gems or the cat's eyes in the beer stein, it like quadruples the whatever it's worth. And yeah, but that's exactly what you can do in this game. Is you can find all these different treasures and they are combinable to make more valuable items, which in my opinion, absolutely amazing. Not only that, but there's also the concept of exploring and of course the different treasures. And as you move along, you get more keys and more items that you can kind of backtrack and do what you need to do. And the game is very linear to that respect, is that there's a very clear defined path, but the choice to go back and continue to explore typically will be in your benefit. You usually find more items, more money, more guns, more treasures, more everything. So even though you don't have to, even though you could play the storyline linearly and just say fuck it to everything else, going back and exploring increases the replay value because there might be something you missed the last time you played the game. So undoubtedly, the main game itself has so much replayability. We also have the replayability of Mercenaries. Mercenaries is a little bit different than traditional Mercenaries, but it was incredible. I played it. And the first time I played it through, I basically played the first level with just a pistol. I continued to upgrade. And honestly, it is great. And not only that, but now they have I think it's double S rank or triple S rank or whatever. And it's the ability to get an even higher ranking depending on how well you can survive with limited resources. So there's endless replayability there, unless you're an absolute god and can get triple S rank or double S rank the first time through. In which case, why are you playing Resident Evil? Go play Dark Souls or something, I don't know. But exactly the thing that I loved about the previous games like Resident Evil 4 and even Resident Evil 5 and 6 to an extent is that they had replay value. Now, granted, Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6 are all probably double the length of Resident Evil 8, but the point still stands is that Resident Evil 8 has an incredible amount of replay value, more so than Resident Evils and future past and everything else. And quite frankly, this is a game I wish that Resident Evil 3 had the same power behind it. The Resident Evil 3 remake, I wish we had the same manpower behind that remake as we did with Resident Evil 8, because had they done that, I probably would have loved Resident Evil 3 remake. I like it, but it's so hard for me to play because it's such a letdown. They didn't put enough work into it. It's not long enough. And then you have Resident Evil 8 where they put all this work into it and it's a reasonably long game and has so much replay value. So that being said, I do have to make comment on one thing that I disliked, not even necessarily about the game itself, but I guess something, I'll say a couple things that I didn't like about the game, but I also have one other general complaint and then a final thought to kind of talk about. But let's talk about something I didn't like about Resident Evil 8. Resident Evil has a long history of a love-hate relationship with boss battles. All right, I'm not going to give too many details, but there are 4 main bad guys in the game. The 4 main bad guys are Lady Dimitrescu, it was the puppet lady, something Benevito or whatever, Moreau, the fish guy, and then Heisenberg. So if you've not played the game, Mother Miranda has 4 lords under her, which are those 4, and you have to basically work through the 4 people before you get to Mother Miranda. Pretty standard setup for any game, really. You have to work through the grunts before you get the boss. And this is no different. So you have to work through the 4 lords before you get to Mother Miranda. And I didn't hate it. Okay, I didn't hate the boss battles with the 4 lords, but some of them were better than others. I quite enjoyed the puppet lady. I really forget her name. I had it earlier, but it's completely gone now. I loved her part of the game. Her part of the game is very Silent Hill, Outlast-esque. You're very vulnerable, and that's probably my favorite part of the game. I would say it was very spooky. Had a reasonable amount of puzzles that did require backtracking in that traditional Resident Evil puzzle solving style. I would say that I liked the Moreau part. It was a water-based level. Resident Evil has a really good history with water-based levels. I mean, like, Del Lago in Resident Evil 4. There's a really great boat section in Resident Evil 5. Resident Evil Revelations is on a boat and, everything else. So water-based levels are typically really fun with Resident Evil in my eyes. So the Moreau section was really amazing. And the Heisenberg section in the factory was interesting. I felt like the boss battle was action-packed, but not very scary. I wasn't afraid as much as I was concerned about what I was doing. In the Lady Dimitrescu fight, I love the entirety of the first part of the game, which is the castle, and the Lady Dimitrescu, what she does, her presence and everything else, is a very motivating presence for me to run away and be afraid of her. But her boss battle was the first one that you really have that's like a major boss, not like a mini boss. And her boss battle was very lackluster, and I honestly, in retrospect, I was like into it at first, but I didn't really like it in retrospect. And hindsight is 2020. Didn't care for her boss battle, but everything else makes up for that fact. Her boss battle seemed very drawn out and very long, and it didn't have a whole lot of challenge because I was able to make it through without dying, and I still had a little bit of ammo left over. But anyhow, I can't say that I hate it, but I didn't necessarily care for it. So anyhow, I have one last complaint that I want to talk about, but it's a little bit of exterior to that of Resident Evil 8. But let's get into it. One last complaint before I have my final thoughts. So one last complaint that I have, and this isn't necessarily even a complaint per se, but it was one of those situations where when you got the game and everything else, that it came with Resident Evil or RE-verse or whatever, and I'm not mad per se, but like they pretty much said to us, hey, this will be available at launch, blah 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 blah, and then they're like, actually, psych, no, it's not. So it's not necessarily even a complaint, because honestly, I assumed that RE-verse is going to be another whatever the other Resident Evil game that they gave us with Resident Evil 3 that was just absolute dog water. But yeah, I don't know. I was interested in it. I was very curious as to how it would play out, how it would be and whatnot, but we didn't end up getting it, so it is what it is. Not gonna cry over spilled milk. But I am curious as to how RE-verse is going to be, especially since the last time they tried to do something new, they tried to do Resistance, and Resistance was just god-awful. Nobody plays it. They tried to promote it, and they tried to make it into the competitive and everything else, but yeah, nobody liked it. Nobody cared for it. Everybody just kind of was like, yeah, piss off. And so I was very concerned that this would be another Resistance, and then they ended up not even releasing it on time. So I don't know. It's not boding well for me, so I'm not going to hold my breath on RE-verse, but when it does come out this summer, I will give it a shot. Of course, give it the old college try, as they say, and I will give it the attempt that it deserves at the very bare minimum. But anyhow, not going to complain about it for too long. I just wanted to bring that up as a point, potentially, that if you are looking to buy this game as well, the game actually, from what I've read, RE-verse may not be for sale in the future. Like, they may be pulling it all together. So it's like, it's one of those situations where if you haven't bought it already, you may want to, because either that or they're going to split the games. You're going to have to buy them separately because, you know, you could just buy it all and all that. But anyhow, final thoughts coming up. But definitely before I get to that, if you are wanting to buy this game, I would hop on it now because I'm pretty sure they're selling it together still, the RE8 and REverse, but like I said, I'm not sure if they're going to start, because I read something that they were thinking about possibly selling them separately. So if you want to buy them together for cheaper, I guess, do it now. If not, oh well. But anyhow, final thoughts on Resident Evil 8 and the wonderful game that they gave us. So long story short, Resident Evil 8 was amazing. Resident Evil 8 honestly fulfilled all of my desires in regards to a good Resident Evil game. Resident Evil 3 Remake really left a bad taste in all of our mouths. And really, Resident Evil 3 Remake had so much criticism because it was released essentially as a companion to a $60 bullshit game that nobody plays. And we were all very frustrated about that, especially since Resistance was supposed to be an anniversary gift. Same thing with Umbrella Corps, both of which are just dog water, absolute dog water. So my final thoughts are that Resident Evil 8 is finally a game that I can be proud of, and honestly, I've been waiting for it, man. Ever since Resident Evil 7, I was waiting for a better game, a game that would make sense, a game that honestly to me would satisfy that Resident Evil itch in the back of my brain, and it did, and honestly it did. I'm super excited for Resident Evil 9. What I've heard so far is that Resident Evil 9 is going to be the last main series title game they're going to make for a while. So it's going to kind of cap off the trilogy of Resident Evil 7, 8, 9, just like 1, 2, 3, and then, or 0, 1, 2, 3, and then, 4, 5, 6, and so on and so forth. But yeah, Resident Evil 9 is going to cap off this final trilogy, and then they're going to start making more offshoot games, spin-off games based on other events, which will be interesting. I'd be very curious to see where they go with that. I'd love to see them do a remake of Resident Evil Outbreak, File 1 and 2. I wouldn't hate a Code Veronica remake. I don't really care for the original Code Veronica too much, but I would love to see a remake of it because I feel like in a modern RE engine, kind of like how they did with RE2 and RE3, RE2 and RE3 are very aesthetically good games for the most part. The mechanics work well. And I think that if we were to apply that and moved it over to a remake of Code Veronica, I feel like I would like that because the concept of Code Veronica is great. The monster designs of Code Veronica are great. It's just a very long, drawn-out, boring game, in my opinion, that just I don't really like it. So I feel like if they made a remake true to form, I would love that. Hell, I wouldn't even mind playing like a remake of Gaiden or, Dead Aim. Really, they could go obscure and even go as far to, remake the Survivor games. There was an old YouTuber, I think her name was Shadow Leggy. He used to talk all the time about how Resident Evil fans always forgot about Ark Thompson, the main protagonist of Resident Evil Survivor. And honestly, we have. Resident Evil Survivor walked so that way Resident Evil 7 could run. Resident Evil Survivor was not nearly as popular and as polished as modern first-person shooters, but that was where first-person shooters started, especially in regards to Resident Evil. Now, Survivor 2 was more arcade-esque and definitely not good, but Resident Evil Survivor 1 was alright-ish, and honestly, again, it started that process so that way we could have games like Resident Evil 7 and 8 that are so amazing. So, remember your roots. I would love to see a remake of those. Honestly, remake all the Resident Evil games. Hell, I don't care. But just keep making Resident Evil games. That's all that matters. But anyhow, for right now, guys, that's my final thoughts. I'm very excited about where Capcom is taking the game. I really don't care for Capcom as an overall, overarching theme. They've done some pretty shitty things overall for different game series, not even just Resident Evil, but anyhow, point being is that I'm actually excited with the progress of Resident Evil, and I'm excited for where the future takes us. So hopefully we hear some news pretty soon about what they're planning and everything else. But for right now, I'm gonna let you guys go. Enjoy the rest of your Friday. Enjoy your weekend. I'll see you guys in the next one. Stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy, and we will see you next week. See ya.